Good morning. This is Eric Mulford coming to you live from the Pastor's Class in Murphy Hill Baptist Church. Just let me know if you're on so I will know that we're streaming okay this morning. I'm going to share a few things with you today that might be helpful to us going forward. So I want to wait and make sure that people join me before I start with that. All right. If you're on, let me know, please. That will help me drastically. So, all right. Good morning, Sharon. I have dropped a link in the comments section, and that link is very simple. It's being scrolled across the bottom of the page, and that scrolling across the bottom of the page is a link that will take you to a sign-up form. I've been asked by Pastor Mike. Give you a little background here. About a year ago, I did a funeral by webinar, which that was kind of interesting. It works. It's not the best way to do it, but it does work. And we actually did a funeral in that manner. Been asked about doing a funeral for Matt. For those of you who don't know, our good brother Matt Reed passed away earlier this week. And so we've been asked to do a virtual funeral for him, which I think is easy enough to do in Facebook. The problem is that we have lots of people who are getting kicked out of Facebook and getting banned right now. So I have looked and tried to find an alternative to that. We'll be able to do it in Facebook, but to find an alternative to that, and that alternative is going to allow us to be able to have private conversations with each other. For example, there may be a story I want to tell Chris that I don't want anybody else to know about Matt, and that might be my time to be able to do that. So I found a way to do that. I want to test that out. I need your help to be able to do that. So if you will click on that link that I provided in the comments and then fill out that form, it needs a first name and an email address, and I will send you an invite. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, we're going to test that platform. It's a community type platform that allows both a presentation and a private communication. So I think it's kind of, it may be the alternative to what we have to do in the future. Just trying to stay on top of this. Too many things are happening too quickly in our world today, and I don't want to overwhelm anybody. I never want to do that, but what I do want to do is I want to make sure that people understand that there are alternatives besides Facebook, and we can help you to communicate with each other better by doing that. So I'm going to test that out at 4 o'clock this afternoon. For anybody who wants to join, you will be invited to participate because the participation helps us to understand how that's working. Okay, so if you will do that for me, that will be helpful. Enough of that. What I want to talk about today is, and I promised this, that I was going to set aside our study in the book of Acts for 1 week. And I wanted to take just a little bit of time, and I wanted to talk about what should the believer's response, what should be the believer's biblical response to the current events. What does the Bible tell us about the current events? Not what do we hear on Facebook, not what do we hear from other people, but what does the Bible have to say about that? And so I think it's really important that we understand what the Bible has to say about current events and that we address it from that perspective, that we learn to live our lives in a biblical fashion rather than in a highly responsive fashion to the things that happen around us. So I'm going to take you through a quick Bible study here. I'm going to hold a conversation about the kinds of things I think are going to be important for us as biblical believers in the light of the current events. What is our responsibility? Because, by the way, this is not the first time that things have been difficult for believers. It's not the first time. And should the Lord tarry, it will not be the last time. So I'm going to address a couple of myths. I'm going to give you a couple of quotes from something that is outside of the Bible that I think just kind of nails what I want to say today. And I'm going to take a look at a couple of passages of scripture I think will be helpful. So that's where we're going to go today. Let's take a look. First of all, I need to make sure that you can see my screen. And so what you'll find here is we're going to be in, we'll start out here in Luke. In the book of Luke, Luke chapter 17, verse 26, it says this: just as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. Keep in mind this, the Bible refers to 3 different time periods. We have the time period of the days of Noah. That was the pre-flood time period. Then we have the time period after the flood. That's the time that we live in now. And then we'll have the time period following that. The world was destroyed by a flood at the end of the days of Noah. The world will be destroyed by fire after this time period that we're in right now. And then there will be the eternal time period, which won't be time at all, but there will be a third stage that we'll go to, and that third stage will be the eternal realm. And so Jesus reminds us that as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. Very important to keep that in mind because of this. Now, let me show you something here from Genesis chapter 3. In Genesis chapter 3, remember, that would have been the start of the days of Noah, and then it ended with Noah. But in Genesis chapter 3, we have the fall of man. And what we have in the narrative of the fall of man is this. When the serpent comes to the woman, and you see that in this passage beginning in verse 4, but the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open. Now look carefully at that phrase, and you'll be like God, and you'll be like God, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. In the days of Noah, man desired to be like God. The fall brought that desire to be like God. What do we have going on today in our world? We have people who are trying to pretend that they're God. I'm watching the manipulation of information and facts go on in the world that we live in, and people are literally playing God. And they're not just playing. They have in their hands the power of life and death, a power that only belongs to God, and they're playing God. Now, I have no control over that, none. I understand that Jesus said that as it was in the days of Noah, when people wanted to be God. I get that. So let's take a look at what should our response be. I understand this. I know that the desire of man is to be able, and certainly the desire of the devil is to take God's place, to dethrone God and be able to have complete control and have your worship to him. It's also man's desire to do the same thing. There were a lot of creepy things that took place in the days of Noah. And I think there's a lot of creepy things that are going on in our world today as well. So let's take a look at a couple of things here that we find in 2 Timothy chapter 4. This is the believer's biblical response to the world that we live in. Paul says to Timothy, I charge you in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ, who is to judge the living and the dead, that by his appearing and his kingdom, preach the word. Our responsibility as a believer, our biblical responsibility in the current events, is to continue to hold fast to the word of God, to preach the word, to be prepared, to be ready in season and out of season. When we have opportunity and when we don't, we're to be ready. When the doors are open, we should be ready. When the doors are closed, we should still be ready. Let me give you a couple of falsehoods that have been proclaimed that has created a problem for believers today. One, and you'll fuss with me about this one, but this is really important, and that is we've believed a lie that this is a Christian nation. No, Christians are people. They're people. And this is a nation made up of lost people and believers. It may have been founded on Christian principles. You can argue with me about that all day long, but God is in the business of providing salvation to people, just to people, not to nations, but to people. Who needs to hear the word? People. The psalmist said, "Why did the heathen rage and the people imagine the vain thing?" As if we were supposed to be surprised by that. And the reason is because they're heathen. We shouldn't be at all surprised by the fact that people are not responding well today. What we should do instead is we should hold fast to the word. We may have had more freedoms in 2019 than we have in 2021. But we have to be ready to preach the word. We have to be ready in season and out of season. We have to hold fast to the gospel. There's no mention here of politics. There's no mention that politics is going to make it easier or politics is going to make it harder. And by the way, I have a quote about that in just a second, but preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. And what does that mean? Reprove. That is to counsel with a view toward a correction in attitude or action. Rebuke, which means, hey, if you keep going down this path, this is what's going to happen. And exhort with complete patience and teaching. Our responsibility in this time, you say, well, how do you know that applies to this time? Look at verse 3. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching. When are we supposed to be ready? When people don't endure sound teaching, but they have itching ears and they will accumulate to themselves teachers to suit their own passions. The time we're supposed to be ready is when people are heaping to themselves teachers who itch their ears, who scratch their ears, tell them the things that they want to hear. I've heard people on both sides of the issue, both sides politics. How can a believer be a true Christian and vote Republican, or how can a believer be a true Christian and vote Democrat? I've heard both of those arguments, by the way. And the fact is that the gospel's neither Democrat nor Republican. That's foolishness. It's foolishness. And when you do that, what you're doing is you're itching people's ears to suit your own desires. And what do those people do? Verse 4, and they will turn away from listening to the truth. And they'll wander off into what? Myths, fables, things that are not true, things that sound great. You know why a myth sounds so great? Because it sounds great. You know why deception is so good? Because it's deceiving. As for you, Bible believer, always be sober-minded. Don't get caught up in practices and politics. We are to recognize that we're children of the kingdom, and we're to represent the kingdom while we're here. Jesus said, occupy till I come. He didn't say vote Republican. He didn't say vote Democrat. He said, occupy till I come. You know what that means? That means continue to share the gospel with people who are lost, because one of these days they're going to die and they'll face an eternity without Christ if we don't share the gospel with them. And it really doesn't matter how they voted. What really matters is, did they choose Jesus? That's what really matters. As for you, always be sober-minded. Endure suffering. When things are going the way that you don't like them to go, don't be begging Jesus to return. Be begging him for an opportunity to share the gospel with somebody who needs to hear it. I think we want it really, really easy And I got news for you. We've only had a very brief period of time in history when the church has had it easy. And if the easy goes away, we still have a responsibility to endure suffering and do the work of an evangelist. Share the gospel. Fulfill your ministry. And as we're seeing opportunities in the church shrink, that doesn't mean your ministry went away. It might mean your place of service went away, but your ministry did not change. If the church is forced to go underground, it doesn't mean that your ministry changes. It just means your opportunity for ministry changes. I think it's important for us as biblical believers to have a biblical response to what we see going on in the world. Without saying anything about how I feel about those events, it's important to understand how I feel about my responsibility. I know what my responsibility is. My responsibility is to hold fast the word. My responsibility is to share the gospel to a lost and dying world. Because, by the way, in just a few years, the vast majority of us are going to be gone. And so is our opportunity to be able to share. We need to make sure that we fulfill our ministry today, regardless of what regardless of what we see happening in the world, regardless of how we feel about what we see happening in the world. And I'm going to give you two quotes from things that I see happening in the world. And I'm going to share those on the screen in just a second. I'm going to read them to you. And I want you to take careful note of this because I think this will help. And these are those two quotes. These were shared with me by my cousin this morning. I'm greatly indebted to him for that. And the first one is, I believe that the worship of political ideology has effectually become the chief religious rival to Christianity in America today. I think that's true. The worship of political ideology has effectively become the chief religious rival to Christianity in America today. I think the man who said that knew what he was talking about. This is a pastor my cousin follows, and he shared that with me this morning. Yep, that's pretty spot on. The second one I want you to see is this. And this says, whether you consider yourself religious or irreligious, doesn't make any difference whether you're lost or saved. Republican or Democrat, when you idolize politics, you inevitably demonize those you disagree with. It's true. True statement. So in the world that we live in today, it's very, very important that we pay careful attention to our responsibility. I know what my responsibility is. I know some people who felt like it was their responsibility to go to Washington, D.C. It's my responsibility to share the gospel with them because they went, regardless of whether they whatever. I still have a responsibility to share the gospel with them. It didn't change my responsibility. And it didn't make them a hero because they did or didn't go. All right? I wanted to take just a moment today and share a little bit with you about, I'm sorry, I got a bad scratch in my throat. I'll share just a little bit with you about what should the believer's biblical response be in the light of current events. Here it is. Nothing's changed. You still have to share the gospel. Don't forget that. You still have to share the gospel. People are still lost. They're still dying. They're still on the way to hell. And we still have a gospel to share. Thank you. I'm about to the end of my voice. Thank you for joining me this morning. And don't forget to click on the link so that you can join our community platform walkthrough today.